Hi there, good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar on the Procurement Act and changes to procedure types. I hope you're ready for the ride this afternoon. It's difficult for it to come across as potentially the absolutely most fascinating topic area, but there's an awful lot of people that have taken the time out of their lunch in the middle of the week to come and join. So I'm hoping that we're able to provide a lot of value, and the topics and things we cover are obviously going to be of interest, and there's some takeaway. We'll try and tie in some of the stuff and make it a little bit more practical for you as well. Big news though, folks. At the start of the webinar, I should say we were expecting both myself and my colleague, Alistair, to be co-hosting this webinar. There is in a continuation of the difficult events from yesterday in the continent. There are some nationwide internet issues affecting a particular provider. So as it stands, unless he makes a dramatic comeback from the disconnected abyss, it's just going to be myself trying to plod through the webinar this afternoon. It's very unfortunate because obviously some of the material was earmarked for Alistair to talk through with you, and I will be winging it ever so slightly. But we hope we can still get through the topic areas. Oh, he's not just re-emerged. I've just given it the big one, and my colleague Alistair has just reappeared like a phoenix from the ashes. Alistair, are you with us?
For now, I think there's a Sky outage, so I can only apologise if I drop off again. Yeah, sorry, stress.
It's all right. I was just saying I was going to try and trip through anyway. Anyway, we spent a little bit of time and not added any value to anyone apart from possible some light relief for a Tuesday afternoon. I'll say my name's Andrew Watson. I'm the bid and training consultancy manager here at Proactis. All things bidding is how we spend our days here trying to support our clients be as successful as possible with their public sector bidding endeavours. I'll let my fleet-footed, fleeting colleague Alistair introduce himself.
Yes, hi, I'm Alistair O'Donnell. I'm the bid manager within Andrew's training and consultancy team. And again, live and breathe it, all things public sector procurement, while my Wi-Fi allows. So
While,
again, I
while
can
the
only apologise.
technology while the technology permits. Oh, it's going to be a roller coaster, folks. You thought it was going to be boring. Okay, just to cover off what we're gonna the agenda for this afternoon, we're aiming to stay on between 30 and 45 minutes and really spin through some of this terminology. The most important pressing question we always get asked is the webinar recording available afterwards? Yes, of course, you'll be sent a link to it so you can review some of this stuff, especially because it's quite terminology kind of procedurally dense, so you can do a bit of a refresh afterwards, make sure everything's sinking in and you're comfortable. The takeaway messages will be around, don't panic and stuff like that. We'll get through it. But yeah, let's talk about what we're going to do. Alistair's going to do a bit of an introduction, a bit of context, a bit of scene setting. We're then going to talk about, well, what's different, what's changed, the same post Procurement Act going live, and what's changed, what stayed the same. We're going to talk about the new reality of what open procedures are. We had them before. Versus what competitive flexible procedures are, and that's the biggest part of what we're talking about, because that is the big sort of change area that we want to focus around about procedures. We'll talk about direct awards, and then we'll also just touch on a little bit around frameworks and dynamic markets, both of which dynamic markets are new and frameworks have a new element to them. So without further ado, and while the technology still permits us to, I will hand over to Alistair, and I'll let you dive in. Alistair, good to have you
Thank
back.
you.
I was missing you, honestly, I was.
Yeah, good to be here. I'll go as quickly as I can, get as much in before I drop off. So yeah, as Andrew has said, we will explore the tendering procedures available to buyers under the Procurement Act. We'll discuss what's changed, what stayed the same, and how, for yourselves on this call, how to use this understanding to plan for your future tender returns. So before we dive straight into it, I think it would help just to set some wider context around the Act and the issues that it seeks to resolve with some of the changes that we are going to discuss. One theme that has repeated throughout my own research, certainly, is that the new Act has been guided by deep sector research conducted by the government. They've gone to market, they've sought opinions and expert advice on how to craft this legislation to help businesses bid into the public sector. So while Brexit was the main catalyst for this change to collate our procurement legislation into one place and regain our sovereignty in all things procurement, the Act extends far beyond that. It simplifies previously complex procedural types by permitting buyers more autonomy and choice in the design of their procurement exercises. They can lift elements of the previous procedural types as they wish, though aren't bound to use these. They can also introduce new innovative methods as the procurement exercise requires. Now, this is of course caveated by obligations placed on buyers to select procurement routes that are proportionate to the nature, cost and complexity of the goods or services being procured. Buyers must also pay constant regard to the overarching principles of the Act, which include promoting value for money, maximising public benefit, operating transparently, acting with integrity, and treating bidders equally. There's also an overarching obligation on buyers to reduce or remove barriers to SME participation. So I would argue that translates into their not being able to use unnecessarily complex procedures where a simplified version would maybe do. The new Act also permits buyers to move away from much of the rigidity previously experienced, again permitting this vital flexibility as we've discussed. So simple and flexible are the buzzwords that we're going to explore today as we compare the new procedural types with the outgoing legislation. Now, I'll use the words current and outgoing interchangeably today when referencing the Public Contract Regulations 2015, as we're still in this transitional period where some opportunities are still being governed by these regs. Only opportunities published on or after the 24th of February 2025 are being governed under the Procurement Act 2023. So we do still have a few opportunities being implemented by the regs. I don't suspect we'll be in this position much longer, but just by way of explanation, the 2015 regs are both current and outgoing in a very limited sense. Back to the Procurement Act, I'd say another theme to bear in mind is that this is, to my mind, it doesn't represent systemic change of these procedures. Many of the existing outgoing procedural types are retained, some are refined, others expanded, and in many cases, it's the rules surrounding their use that have been substantially relaxed. So don't now forget everything that you know about these procedures, as many of them remain, albeit in a rebranded format. So if we could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So where the Public Contract Regulations 2015 provided for a very limited degree of flexibility when buyers were designing procurement exercises, it was done within some pretty strict constraints and conditions set for these formal procurement procedures. Now, just for completeness, the PCR Regs 2015 had an open procedure, restricted procedure, a procedure with competitive dialogue, a competitive procedure with negotiation, innovative partnerships, and negotiated procedures without prior publication. We'll touch on all of these as we go. So we can see from this slide that these were considered complex, cumbersome, and inflexible. And this feedback came from us as industry suppliers and also from buyers who were trying to design these procurement exercises. So the feedback, as we've said, has been taken on by the government and translated into the new flexible procedures that we now have. So you'll see in the bottom two bullet points, the Government Commercial Functions Transforming Public Procurement Learning Manual states that the new competitive flexible procedure will provide the opportunity and flexibility to design and undertake a bespoke multi-stage procurement process. It will be possible, therefore, to replicate existing PCR procedural formats under the competitive flexible procedure, as well as branching out to create new formats of competition structures. So again, then, the themes that we're looking at aren't of a complete restructuring from the ground up. Rather, it's new, more flexible rules governing the use of procedures, whilst providing buyers with the flexibility that they've said that they need to achieve the best results. So if we could move on. As we've touched in our introduction, buyers now have increased autonomy and powers granted to them by the Act in the form of flexibility in how they arrange procurement exercises. However, checks and balances do exist, as buyers, as we've said, must select a procedure that is proportionate to the nature, cost and complexity of the contract, and by extension, proportionate to the resources companies will have who are bidding into the opportunity. So again, this is repetition, but Section 12, subsection 4A and B of the Procurement Act 2023 states that contracting authorities must have regard to the fact that SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, face barriers to participation, and that buyers must also consider whether such barriers can be removed or reduced. So again, overly complex procurement exercises would be in direct contravention of this principle. So I think we'll expand this as we go, but I don't think, or certainly my interpretation is that buyers don't just have carte blanche in how they're going to apply this. There are proportionality checks, there's balances, there's overarching principles that they do still need to take cognizance of when formulating these procedures. So again, it's not going to change the world. It's more of a reinterpretation of how these procedures are going to be used. So analysis, there's a stability and predictability retained within this legislation, which can be vital for companies, particularly SMEs, as many existing procedures have been retained, albeit indirectly. However, the changes do allow important degrees of flexibility, as we've said, within these systems to enable the delivery of the overarching principles of value for money, maximising public benefit, transparency, yada yada. They also progress themes of procedural simplification, efficiency, and flexibility, which I think we'd all agree helps everybody involved in these exercises, both buyers and suppliers.
Alistair, just
So,
going to
oh,
chip in a
please.
tiny bit. So, I mean, in summary, we're just saying that like the the procedure that the authorities choose to use for any given procurement should only be as complex as it needs to be to achieve the overarching principles and to achieve the goals of the procurement that they've set out.
That's the vibe I'm getting from my research. Yeah, just
Mhm.
enough, because we need to promote value for money efficiency. We need to consider the fact that SMEs have barriers, and buyers are obligated to consider if these barriers can be reduced and removed. So having a 20-stage procurement process for, a milk run, it's probably not proportionate. So there's
Yeah.
this proportionality test. So yeah, you're right. I think it's just enough.
Okay.
So if we could move the slide, we'll have a little look at what's changed and what's stayed the same. Next one again. So again, criticisms of the outgoing regime, the PCR regs, were that they could be complex and cumbersome. The market feedback has been taken on by the government, as we've said. So what's changed? We see a change to the types of procedures that buyers can use. Now, the open procedure remains, as does the negotiated procedure without prior publication, though this has been rebranded as direct awards. The other procedural types have been amalgamated into the competitive flexible procedure, with the rules surrounding their use substantially diminished. Now, under the new rules brought in by the Procurement Act 2023, contracting authorities may model procurement procedures on existing procedures, providing this stability and predictability for SMEs, or they may come up with their own bespoke procedures. So again, there's so many options. We can take inspiration from the outgoing current directives, or we can have a think, okay, do we move with the times? Is there maybe another way that we can do this? Is there maybe a more collaborative, innovative approach that we could be taking? And again, a lot of repetition, again, balanced against the rules of proportionality, reducing or removing barriers to SMEs. So my analysis here is that while some rebranding has taken place with regard to the procedural types, the key changes are the flexibility with which buyers may now operate and the overarching move away from complex and cumbersome procedures, with these being replaced with streamlined, efficient, and flexible options for buyers. Now, what stayed the same? To your point, Andrew, the open procedure is still, if we could move the slides, it's
Mm.
still a viable option for buyers to use. and we shouldn't forget about it. A lot of emphasis is being placed by me on the competitive flexible procedure, but the open remains a viable option for simple single-stage procurement exercises. Buyers will continue to use this regularly, so don't overlook it in your research or your understanding. I'd again even go further and say that to the backdrop of these rules of proportionality and SME participation, there will be instances where buyers must use the open procedure. And again, just repeating from the intro, we see also that the competitive flexible procedures allow buyers to draw inspiration from the outgoing provisions and use these as they see fit. So there's nothing stating that the outgoing regs are to be dismissed. They still represent viable options for buyers to use, or in the very least, draw inspiration from. So that's your negotiated procedure, that's your ongoing dialogue, that's your pilot schemes, product demonstrations. They're not going anywhere. We've just broken down some of the rules around how they're implemented. And we see here that the timeframes have been adjusted down slightly from 30 days to 25. This is of course a change. I've kept it on this slide as it represents a slight procedural tweak from 30 days down to 25. So we'll move forward. Again, sticking with the theme, we're going to look at open procedure versus competitive flexible. So we'll take a quick look at the open procedure and the competitive flexible and discuss some of the benefits of each. We have a situation now, if I haven't got the point across already, where buyers can choose either the open procedure or the competitive flexible procedure, again, qualified by the responsibility to act proportionately and in alignment with these overarching principles. So the open procedure, many similarities with the outgoing model. The new open procedure is very similar to the outgoing open procedure. It's a single stage tendering procedure. There's no restrictions on which applicants can submit a tender, and the open procedure tends to be more suitable for simple and quick public procurements. We're of the belief, I'm going to put your name against this, Andrew, I'm certainly of the belief that the majority of procurement exercises are still likely to use this structure for simple in and out procurement. For completeness, some minor differences are again, see if you can guess, the flexibility that buyers are afforded and their obligations to consider the wider strategic aims of the Act. And again, then we'll see to the right, benefits include transparency, efficiency, wider competition by allowing a broader range of suppliers to compliantly tender, and they're more cost effective by virtue of being quicker and far simpler to operate and evaluate. So they're easier for bidders to bid into, and they're easier for buyers to operate and evaluate. Charging on, if we go to the next slide, the competitive flexible procedure. So there's now more ability and freedom for buyers to design procurement exercises to suit their needs. Now this can include inspiration, as we've said, using negotiation, dialogue, post-selection engagement, demonstrations. Now, if these are required, they can be used without having to comply with the previous pretty rigid rules surrounding each of these from PCR Regs 2015. So while each procedural type is no longer isolated to its own procedure, they can still be used. So if we take a little look at the benefits of some of them, because they're not going anywhere. So I've taken some of the 2015 regs. We'll talk about some of the benefits, knowing that buyers are still going to be drawing inspiration from these. So if we could hop on to the next slide. So the negotiated procedure, it's flexible, gives buyers the opportunity to refine or adapt procurement requirements to achieve the best outcomes. It's adaptable, again, ideal for projects where technical specs can't be precisely defined up front or where innovative solutions are required. So a little look at use cases. There's a theme is going to emerge here, which I think we've touched upon already, that open procedures will remain in common use for simple single stage procurement opportunities. The use cases for the new competitive flexible tend to be more complex, more moving parts. So use cases for the negotiated procedure, complex or innovative projects where requirements may not be fully defined or where supplier input is needed to shape the solution. Risk reduction, again, to address uncertainties, clarify details, mitigate risks by engaging with suppliers to refine proposals. And market engagement, encouraging innovation and attracting a diverse range of suppliers, including SMEs. Now, I think an important point around this is that typically direct communication between suppliers and buyers during an ongoing tendering exercise is forbidden. You're not allowed to speak to them. I've made that mistake a couple of times at the start of my career, and they're pretty strict in their implementation of that. So something for us all to be aware of. That's why clarification logs exist. There's a very controlled structure through which you're expected to communicate with buyers to keep it open, transparent, and fair. Everybody can see your question and everybody can see your answer, with some exclusions to that. So using a formal negotiated procedure allows this dialogue, and it's permissible because it's been advertised that that's what's happening, and everybody has the same opportunities. So it's this level playing field that we're coming from. I think it's fantastic. I mean, like we say, it's an extension of the theme, but buyers can do worse than to ask the market, how does this work? Can you explain this to me? Is it something that we can maybe refine and progress to again achieve the best possible outcome? So keep these in mind, because like I say, they're not going anywhere, and something just to stay aware of. If we could move the slide, please. Thank you. So again, product demonstrations, pilot schemes. Benefits of these: bespoke. They support the evaluation of truly bespoke opportunities, indicating how well suppliers can adapt existing solutions to meet specific requirements. They benefit innovation, again, a main theme of what we're discussing today. Benefits of innovative approaches, which may not be immediately evident from written proposals. Now, this could be, from my experience writing tenders over the last year or so, I've seen quite a few innovative solutions. This could be innovative engineering solutions, modern methods of construction, or an app, for example, where a picture or a product demonstration paints 1,000 words. Demonstrations help buyers with their comprehension of novel and innovative solutions that they may not immediately be familiar with. So there's so many benefits to both parties of using these. So again, use cases, complex requirements, intricate or innovative solutions where there may not be existing market understanding, mitigates risk with a try before you buy, and it fosters introductions, understanding, collaboration, and partnership working between buyers and suppliers. Buyers are getting suppliers in to do these demonstrations. Suppliers are getting in front of buyers to whom they're trying to sell. So always a good thing. I think as well, one of the issues that we've seen with the existing legislation with regards to innovation is it carries a bit of baggage of being high risk, unknown. Anything that's unknown is high risk, and I don't blame buyers for being averse to that, especially when they're spending public money with an overarching obligation to promote value for money, and promote public interest. So I get it. These mechanisms, when used properly, break down these barriers, and they're creating space in the industry for innovative solutions which may have previously been overlooked. They're now getting their time to shine. So all good things. This is good things for us as suppliers. If we could move forward again, please. Last one. Dialogue, again, as we've spoken, quite similar to negotiated procedure, typically forbidden within procurement exercises, in following these ideals of openness, fairness, and transparency. However, when used properly and when advertised properly, it allows buyers to explore and refine supplier proposals to ensure that they meet the specific needs of the procurement exercise and, of course, the buyer's needs. So use cases, again, complex specifications or innovative requirements. It's a real continuation of a theme here. Collaboration, never a bad thing. Collaboration between buyers and suppliers from an early stage to develop bespoke solutions. Risk mitigation, again, through ongoing communication, and it promotes this market engagement, allowing buyers to understand the capabilities and limitations of the market, ensuring that their procurement aligns with existing solutions and that you're not asking for something that doesn't yet exist. So all very positive continuations from the outgoing regs. Now, I will hand over to Andrew in just a moment, but I do just want to finish off with a quick word on innovation and how what we've spoken about in the last few slides aligns with this, with the continuation in use of product demonstrations, pilot schemes, ongoing dialogue, and combined with the new ability for buyers to modify the terms of ongoing procurement procedures. So this is an ability that buyers now have. Provided the modification is not substantial, they can tweak and modify, is the language used in the Act, modify the terms of procurement exercises while they're ongoing. So I'm ever hopeful that this new flexibility will support the uptake and understanding of innovative, novel solutions, paving the way for more industry acceptance of innovation, and as we've said, shedding some of its high risk label or baggage. So these new procedures should hopefully shed some of the stigma around these unknown options, creating these incubator spaces for development or low risk opportunities for buyers to dip their toe into innovative solutions without committing to more than they wish to. Early and ongoing market engagement should also reduce barriers to entry or participation for companies, especially SMEs with novel solutions, in bringing these to buyers' attention. Again, in addition to this, with the overarching obligation for buyers to promote and pursue value for money, novel and innovative solutions are entitled to be heard. It's a very exciting time for new ideas, and the platform is being set for these to be brought to market and accepted by buyers. A further point, just to finish off what I said there about modifying the terms of a procurement opportunity during an ongoing exercise, is that this can also promote innovation and support buyers in achieving the best outcomes from their procurement, enabling an adaptability to emerging ideas which may not have been initially considered, allows the buyer to conclude their exercise whilst staying reactive to and incorporating these new ideas. I think a point just to make here, I've come across this in the last couple of weeks really, is that buyers are specialists in their field. There will be highly competent procurement experts running these exercises, but it's not to say that they're market specialists in your sector. Um, one of the, I won't name the company, but one of the more impressive solution designs I've seen, a completely innovative solution that I've worked with this year, is aerated concrete remediation, working with a company, and they've got this patented solution, and it's phenomenal, and it works, and they're winning work, and the work's being delivered safely under project program, under budget. Now, buyers have previously not understood enough about this, so they just say, well, variant tenders will not be accepted. This is how we want it done. Traditional construction methods or not at all. But this company has managed to get in the ear of a couple of buying authorities, convey this novel solution, and it's been accepted. So I think a really important message to get across is that you are the industry expert, you're the sector expert. And if you've got an idea or a solution design that you want to discuss with the buyer, I think the platform is now being set for these to be heard. So don't lose confidence in your own expertise. And often buyers will benefit from hearing what you've got to say. So again, having this platform from a supplier's perspective, I'm hoping that it also encourages creativity in solution design, as there is an understanding that procurement terms may be amended or can be amended slightly, so as not to exclude bold and innovative designs. There's no guarantee that you'll win the opportunity. Don't get me wrong, you can't guarantee that, but at least you won't be excluded, and buyers will, at the very minimum, consider your idea and evaluate the merits of your tender response. So very exciting time for innovation. I'll now hand over to Andrew for some examples of what we've discussed and how these procedural types are being used in live procurement exercises.
Thanks, Alistair. We'll just do a little bit of a summary of the analysis that we've undertaken. It probably sort of acts to provide a little bit of reassurance about kind of where we are and what's actually happening with this type of stuff. But just for absolute clarity, when we're talking about the options that authorities have in terms of being able to use the competitive flexible procedure and all the different pieces that that entails that Alistair's kind of summarised and gone through over the past few slides, these apply to um, above threshold procurements. So below threshold procurements are all still going to be run as open procurements. Okay, so if everyone remembers the figures at the top of their head, if the threshold level for central government bodies is £139,688. Above that, it's above threshold, below that, below threshold. And for non-central bodies, it's £214,904. So the contract is much higher. It's over 5 million for work site, for sort of construction stuff. So if it's above those levels that we've talked about, then they have the option about whether or not it's going to be open or if it's going to be a competitive flexible procedure. But below that level, which is by numbers the vast majority of contract notices that you're going to see opportunities to apply to, those are still going to be open, which, as Alistair has explained already, are staying, broadly the same as they were under the old regime as is under the new. So just as a further kind of reassurance, because some of this stuff can seem a little bit complicated, the majority of above threshold opportunities, as we're seeing at the moment, are still being run as open opportunities. Okay, and then so the so most of the time it's this open procedure which you're really familiar with. And then again, just to add a little bit more simplicity reassurance, the majority of above threshold procedures that are being run as competitive flexible procedures are looking an awful lot like what we referred to as restricted procedures in the old world, okay, which is basically the simplest sort or one of the simpler configurations we can have under this new competitive flexible procedure. Just for reference, restricted procedure being where it's run as a two-stage process. There's a selection stage, which suppliers have to provide information about their current capability and past experience. And then if they pass that stage, a selected number of suppliers will then get invited to tender stage and they put forward their solution for the requirement. Okay, so but it's done as a two-stage process with a gap, a time in between those two stages. That's the most common, as it stands just now from the research we've undertaken, most competitive flexible procedures. That is kind of what they are looking like. So again, if you're encountering those, it shouldn't feel very, very unfamiliar. But that's not to say that there aren't, the options for this kind of customizing you kind of design. And I've gone and spent a lot of time looking at ones that we've been asked to support on, and then also just trawling around what are competitive flexible procedures looking like at the moment? What are different authorities? How are they running with them? What construction or what kind of procedure configurations are they going for? And I've just got some examples which should hopefully act as a little bit of reassurance that if you do come up against these, yeah, I'm comfortable and I'll be able to manage these dependent on what they look like. Okay, so this is a simple one around the provision of, so these are real examples that I've taken the details from, provision of customer experience training on for a train company. So on the right hand side, the bullets there are documenting what they've set out as the competitive flexible procedure that they are going to be using. And I don't think anything there should be particularly, hopefully wouldn't be particularly scary. What they've got is you do your standard where you're expressing your interest. There'll then be a pre-qualification questionnaire, which is similar, the pre-runner to selection questionnaire. So asking some information about your organization, your current capabilities, and what your previous experience is. If you pass that stage, there's an invitation to tender stage where you will then submit a first response around about what your solution looks like. There's then a negotiation phase after they've evaluated or reviewed your initial submission around your solution. And after the negotiation phase, they're asking you to submit your best and final written offer, and all of those best and final written offers are then going to be evaluated, and the winner is the one who's considered the best, and that's who's going to be awarded. Okay.
Andrew,
Uh, yes, Alistair.
sorry, how the turntables. I'm coming in for you. The slides haven't moved on my laptop. I
Sorry,
don't know.
Alistair.
Oh, here we go. Brilliant.
It moved. That's Thank you for flagging. It moved on the other version, but not on the screen version. So thank you for that. Thanks. Sorry, Alistair. So yeah, you can see there on the right hand side those different steps that I've just sort of talked us through. Um, Under the new Procurement Act, there's an idea that negotiation can play a more crucial role in ensuring the things that we want, that the things that authorities want take place, ensuring value for money, transparency, and fair competition. Under this negotiation phase, it allows refinements around things like contract terms, pricing, and service levels before agreements are then finalized. Okay. So there is this sort of ability to kind of negotiate and make material adjustments to things at that stage. Okay. So again, that shouldn't feel very complicated, but it's just if you've not been involved in a tender where there's a negotiation phase, it will all be mapped out in terms of it will be a formally structured, so you'll know what that looks like. It's not like you're supposed to, the negotiations aren't, over drinks and dinner, with you and not with the other ones. It's not what it means. It's about there'll be normally like formal windows where you have an opportunity to engage and do those negotiations, and those will be offered across the board to the different suppliers who have reached that stage of the process. So it should all be very transparent and clear in terms of what that phase will look like. So just an example of the sort of thing that you might come across, dependent on the scale and complexity of the opportunities. As a point that Alistair and I both kind of made reference to, the more complex and more uncertainty potentially around the type of procurement, around what they're looking to procure, the less exactly defined it is, then the more likely they are going to look to build in some complexity within the procedure so that they can make sure they can eke out all the strategic aims of the procurement. Okay, so if you're used to doing very sort of simple, lower scale, repeatable type things, you might not see this type of stuff ever occur. You could go your whole like tendering career within an organization and not come across anything other than basically what looks like open or restricted, but these type of things are not that uncommon. The next example, and I will skip on this time, is one that you might see even more frequently. I'd say this is potentially a little bit even more common than like a negotiation phase, and a lot of you will already have come across, I think, occasions where you do have to do a presentation of some description, which is basically what this evaluation methodology for this opportunity, which was around the design and build of a community hub space, has done. So on the right hand side, given that I've managed to remember to put the slide on this time, you can see that it states that it's a competitive flexible procedure under the Procurement Act, and the stages are the kind of compliance and conditions of participation. So that's basically your equivalent to your selection stage. Stage 2, there's an award criteria, assessment of quality, questions and price, and in brackets it says will include a presentation, semicolon, moderation. Importantly, for that, it's the part about the sort of presentation that they're going to be using, which has made this a little bit different. And on the left hand side, we've just pulled out some of the key points around it. The council may at its discretion request tenderers to attend presentations. In the evaluation methodology, it says will include a presentation, and then it says may include a presentation, but hey, we'll let it slide for now. But what I like that's very clear is the second bullet, the bit that I've highlighted, and this is me obviously lifting the text from the opportunity. For the avoidance of doubt, the questions at such presentations will be directly linked to the quality method statement questions, and the responses given may be used to verify and then moderate the scores of the method questions up or down accordingly. Okay, so they're saying they're building in the potential for them to use a presentation phase, and unlike in the past, where I've seen things about we're going to do a presentation but it won't be assessed, well, then what's the point in doing it? In this occasion, it's saying very explicitly, we're going to ask you to present on aspects relating to the quality statements that you've provided, with the view that the presentation you give may moderate those scores up or down. Okay, so very explicit, clear. They're giving themselves some flexibility. If they think, well, maybe things aren't just quite clear enough, we can run this presentation phase and we can use that to materially impact the scores that have been received in from the quality responses, and that can then potentially have an impact on the procurement outcome. So something like that is probably a really common example, and actually I don't mind at all the way that's been laid out to make it explicit what the point of the presentation is, and how it's been doing. And for anyone who thinks, well, does anything ever get more complicated? Well, looking at this, we can see an example of, this is again taken from their procedure, a competitive flexible procedure that MOD process are going to be using, and you can see that it's got all of the stages, it's got everything in there. There's an awful lot there. But remember the point about proportionality and so on. So this is to do with radar systems. Obviously, everything with MOD is incredibly important. It's highly technical. There's not a million different suppliers that can supply the sort of things that they would need. So I'm by no means saying that the process that they've laid out here is not in any way proportional. I'm sure it is proportional, and it's been very, very heavily thought out for it to be so, to run to so many stages that they've determined are necessary to make sure at the end they have complete confidence that the right supplier will be awarded with, obviously, incredibly critical kind of projects around sort of defense infrastructure, if you like. Okay, so if you're going to have to have a rigorous process for anything, stuff relating to defense is obviously a really obvious candidate, and you can see just browsing through some of the list, multiple stages, interim technical bits, data gathering events, workshops, negotiation phases. It's got the full Buna here, guys, but we understand why, because of the nature of the importance and the nature of the complexity of what they would be doing. So just to show you that there are some very complex examples out there, but they're going to be, hopefully that element of proportionality does fire through, and therefore we're not going to see ones where they need to be that complex very often, and it's just those previous two examples. When you do see competitive flexible procedures, which are going to feel reasonably comfortable, as people that are not dealing with them very, very frequently. So that's a little bit of a whistle stop. Takeaways from it are: below threshold are always going to stay open. Most above threshold are going to be open. Most above threshold that are competitive flexible procedures are going to look a lot like restricted procedures or riffs on that, and it's going to be more high value, complex, more uncertainty, where we're going to deviate a little bit more from that into things like we can see here. Okay. And on that note, I'll hand back to Alistair, just to run us through some stuff around direct awards and where that sits within the new world.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So again, keeping with the theme, some changes, some things staying the same, with this new rebranding of direct awards. So what's changed? Under the Procurement Act 2023, some of the language in this area has been changed. So the negotiated procedure without prior publication has been amended and is now simply direct award. There are additional justifications for using a direct award, extending on the previous justifications from Regulation 32 of the Public Contracts Regulations. So this area is now governed by sections 41 to 44 of the Act and Schedule 5. So section 41 contains the direct award justification route. When one of the direct award justifications from Schedule 5 has been met and the supplier to be awarded is not excluded, then a direct award may be made. However, there's always a however, direct awards can be made to excluded suppliers if it is in public interest. So there's also a test to satisfy within section 41 of the Act, to check if the public interest provision has been satisfied and to decide if a direct award to this particular supplier would be appropriate. So Schedule 5 provisions, there are some new justifications, as we've said, and again, the retention and refinement of some existing outgoing justifications. So new would be prototypes and developments, commodities and advantageous terms of insolvency, and they build upon existing justifications of single suppliers, exclusive rights owned by a supplier, additional or repeat goods, services or works, extreme and unavoidable urgency, which we'll get to, user choice contracts, and defence and security. So if a buying authority wishes to rely upon these justifications to make a direct award, they must satisfy the test from within the Procurement Act. This removes opinion and keeps awards objective, which is another similarity from PCR regs, Regulation 32. Now, if we move on to the slide, there's another option here again with similarities to the old regulations, and that is a switch to direct award. So this is an understanding that if a buyer has run a competitive tendering procurement exercise, which has not resulted in a suitable supplier, they then may use a direct award. And this is found in Section 43 of the Procurement Act. And again, there is a test within Section 43 for what constitutes a suitable tender. So again, we see here through the various tests and strict mechanisms in place that they take subjectivity and opinion out of the application of the legislation. There's strict rules that have been set that need to be followed, but there is an option to switch over if all other options fail. A point of further interest, on the next slide, there's a new route under Section 42, and this is direct awards where it's necessary. So it's known as direct award to protect life. I've also seen it written as ministerial powers for life and safety. Now, I want to cover this in a little bit of detail, as there were some high-profile issues a few years ago with some rampant alleged fraud taking place through the alleged abuse of the outgoing procurement regulations, allegedly. So direct awards can be permitted when it's necessary to do so, be that to protect plant, animal, or human life, or to protect public safety. Now, COVID was a large catalyst for this change. As we discussed previously, some local authorities and public sector buyers struggled to fit procurement exercises within the old Regulation 32. This new allowance should provide the flexibility required to keep procurement moving at pace in times of urgency where necessary. We see here again with the various tests and strict mechanisms in place to take the subjectivity out of the application of the legislation and ensure that the rules are being followed. Now, that is good for bona fide procurement exercises. I think in light of some of the unfortunate cases that came to light during COVID, there are two new protections that have been brought in by the Procurement Act. The first of these is transparency notices are now mandatory, not discretionary, and must be published before a direct award is made. And the second of these is that direct awards must now also observe a standstill period. And the standstill period of 8 days is going to be used. There's a full change under the Act. Standstill periods were 10 days, they're now 8 working days. So on the next slide, what stayed the same? From the outgoing PCR regs, the negotiated procedure without prior publication from Regulation 32, it's been rebranded and refined, but it allows the same activities to take place with some more protections, but again, some flexibility again built in where needed. So we see the new direct award as a continuation of this existing procedure, though with some simplification brought into its implementation, and as I've said, stricter rules governing transparency and accountability. Again, excluded suppliers may not receive direct awards as a rule, though it wouldn't be a piece of UK legislation without a separate page for exclusions and exceptions, which do exist in Section 41. And again, final point, quite repetitive. I do apologise for this one. Many of the justifications for these types of awards have been retained. There have been additions and refinements. However, core justifications, you'll find them all in Schedule 5, have been kept. So quite an interesting piece. So again, a final word from myself before I hand back to Andrew again. The Act has tidied up the outgoing PCR regulations, and it's provided buyers with more control and autonomy in how they arrange and operate procurement procedures. It doesn't represent a complete overhaul of the rules, rather it simplifies their implementation while driving themes of SME participation, value for money, transparency and equality. So back over to yourself, Andrew.
Thanks, Alistair. Just a little bit before we round off then on frameworks and dynamic markets, just through the same lens of kind of what was there before, how do they look different now? So we some of this stuff is going to feel like a bit of a recurring theme based on some of the things that Alistair's touched upon, and then some of the more broad concepts that we've touched upon in other webinars as well. But relating to frameworks, there are stricter transparency requirements that are now in place, obviously relating to that wider theme around transparency. So things like contract award notices are now a requirement for call-off contracts under frameworks and under dynamic markets, whereas that wasn't the case for frameworks and DPSs all the time pre the Procurement Act coming into force. We've got this concept around open frameworks, which are available for authorities to use in structure of procurement. They're not replacing closed frameworks, they can still use those, but they've got this concept of open framework, which can be appropriate. Effectively, an open framework is a successive frameworks published on the same or on very similar terms. It has a maximum time limit of 8 years. The framework must be opened for new entrants, essentially repeat framework, within the first 3 years, and then at least once more within the remaining 5 years of the overall term. And it's suitable where those requirements, that things that they're going to need to procure, the way they're going to need to procure it throughout that period, are going to be stable. If there are material changes to what or how they're going to procure, then they would need a new procurement exercise, and they can't just do this kind of essentially this rollover, this iteration version of it. The idea behind it is that it has some benefits for both the buyer and potentially for suppliers. It allows buyers to be more strategic about reopening, so they can do things like they can choose a time slot where potentially there've been changes within the sort of supplier marketplace. Maybe there's been some innovations and they want to reopen it because there'd be potential for suppliers to be more competitive or to bring more value in terms of what they're looking to procure. It gives them the opportunity to prevent it getting stagnant. So, for example, if there are underperforming suppliers, then they'll be able to potentially displace those with new ones who come in and score well. If you're on an open framework, you can choose to maintain your existing application, i.e. the first time around application, or you can make adjustments to it. But if a supplier is underperforming, then there's the potential for them to be replaced by one who's bringing new innovation, who's reducing prices, etc., etc. So it can help with that piece around keeping things. And also it means that based on, well, actually, what are the procurement cycles with over that 8 year period, they could choose to reopen it, in at the right point within that cycle to be able to get new suppliers in during that point when they're actually going to be looking to use the framework more heavily to purchase. From a supplier point of view, you're not locked out for the full term. It's not closed off, and you will at least have those sort of 2 windows as a minimum to apply. So if things do change, if you can bring innovations, if you've had a chance to revise your offerings or to improve your offerings or to become more commercially competitive, then you might be able to get access to that framework where the first time around you didn't, or you weren't ready to, etc., etc. In terms of what stayed the same around frameworks, obviously closed frameworks, which are not open for these re-entry points, are still able to use. So those are still available for authorities to use if they feel they'd be more appropriate. Broadly, the initial framework application and the ideas around the processes that will be in place around call-offs, the call-off procedures, are still going to remain similar to as they were before. Okay. So it's worth noting that call-offs that take place from a framework will still not require a full tender process, as was the case beforehand. Okay, so just bear that in mind as well. So you need to make sure when you're applying to get onto a framework, be it an open or a closed one, um, what is the mechanism, what is their call-off procedure that's going to be in place? Are they being explicit about it? Are they having a range of different call-off procedures that they're able to use? How do those sit with you in terms of as an organization? Are they going to suit? Are you going to have resource in place to respond to those, etc., etc. Okay. And then just lastly, just to touch on dynamic markets, which are the Procurement Act is now has as the replacement for dynamic purchasing systems. So dynamic markets are the new dynamic purchasing systems, and they are more versatile and can be used more broadly around a wider range of goods, services, and work compared with a more limited scope that was available for their use under the 2015 regulations. So I'm quoting, so that now contracting authorities could choose to undertake any procurement through a dynamic market, which wasn't the case before. I'm still quoting dynamic markets from the government website. Dynamic markets have many of the features of the current dynamic purchasing system and qualification systems, but have been developed to better suit the needs of contracting authorities and utilities and to add clarity. One of the things that you will notice that has changed around them is there are new notice types specific to dynamic markets. So keep an eye out for these. You'll see dynamic market intention notice, which is basically allowing you to then apply to join a dynamic market at the point that it's being formed. You'll see dynamic market establishment notices, which is telling you that that has been created, is live, and that initial tranche of suppliers who gained access to it, and a dynamic market modification notice which will tell you about changes to that dynamic market. One
Andrew,
important, yes,
I
Alistair.
think we're just a slide behind again. Here we go.
Mm,
Nailed it.
how frustrating. Thank you for pointing out. I'm sorry, folks. The tech's not with me. I don't know why that keeps happening. One thing that I'm going to just read, and it's a slightly extended quote that I think is really important, is this. A tender notice, this is quotation, yeah, from the government website. A tender notice is required to advertise a procurement under a dynamic market, while Regulation 21.2 requires that the tender notice includes a statement that the contract will be awarded by reference to suppliers' membership of a dynamic market. Contracting authorities should always consider making it clear in the notice or associated tender documents that being a member of the dynamic market is a requirement of the procurement. This helps to ensure that suppliers are aware that they must be members of the dynamic market in order to participate in the procurement, and may encourage suppliers to apply for membership. Okay, so just to be clear, the reason why I've highlighted that point and read that sort of wordy section there is that you're going to see the tender notices for procurements that are being run through a dynamic market, even if you're not a member of the dynamic market. That's good for two different reasons. It means that it might jog you to then go and join that particular dynamic market, and it means you can look back historically at the opportunities that run through it to see how suitable those would be potentially for you as an organization. So that will help with the whole transparency piece and make an informed decision about whether you want to pursue and join a dynamic market. As was the case, as we often gave advice for DPS, it will still apply for dynamic markets. It can be a very good way as a relatively new entrant into public sector bidding to get up to speed, to get a foothold, and to start seeing if you've got relevant opportunities that you can secure. One, two last things. Dynamic markets do allow authorities to remove suppliers for poor performance or breach of contract. So if we're on it, we've got to perform. In the terms of things that have stayed the same in very simple terms, it's still effectively a list of qualified suppliers that are eligible for future procurements. There's no cap to the number of suppliers that can be on a dynamic market, and it is open for application at all points throughout its lifespan. Okay, so tweaks, some changes, but nothing radical, nothing too drastic. That, folks, is us bang on time. I did think we would be finishing early, but with my technological lack of nous and Alistair's dramatic internet explosion pre-start, we just ran a little couple of minutes over where we thought we would. Hopefully that's provided a little bit of reassurance and comfort. It shouldn't feel super scary. It should feel like there's opportunities for SMEs, and a lot of the stuff won't feel that drastically different. Just a little bit of terminology to get your head around. If you do want to carry on the conversation, please do reach out, particularly on the details that are there, the bid support at tendersdirect.co.uk, or feel free to give us a ring. We're happy to kind of carry on a bit more and see if there's any particular issues or concerns that you've, things that you're encountered you want to discuss a bit more, or bid support more generally. We're very happy to carry on that conversation. But for now, I'm conscious we're a minute over. I'll say goodbye and thank you very much for your attendance. I'm glad we got through it, especially I'm very glad Alistair got through it without any interruptions. Alistair?
Yeah, thank you for your interest and attendance. And yeah, we made it. Hope everyone has a good Tuesday.
Thanks so much, folks. It's been lovely speaking with you all and wishing you all the best for the rest of the day and for the rest of the week. Thanks again.